Hello there, everybody. Welcome to Series 6, Episode 1 of Probably Nothing. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, everybody. Come in, whether you're watching this live or on catch-up in your own time. Welcome. So for those of you who don't know who I am, that sounds like I'm about to do an Oscar speech, doesn't it? My name is Karen Hobbs and I work for the Eve Appeal. Obviously, I run our Ask Eve information service with our lovely nurses, Hilary and Tracie. And Ask Eve has been running for several years now. Probably Nothing has been going for just under 2 years. And we started it because lots of the kind of calls and emails, and apologies if I'm repeating myself for people that have watched every episode of Probably Nothing and are like, oh, here she goes again, the usual spiel. But it is important. So here we go. Lots of people that contact Ask Eve, which is a free expert information service, are often apologetic for bothering us. You're never bothering us. That's literally what the service is for, to help you and kind of say sort of sorry to bother you. I'm sure it's probably nothing, but, and then they go on to ask their gynae cancer query. And, you know, most of the time, it's important to know that, you know, if someone's got potential symptoms for one of the gynae cancers, all of the symptoms for all of the gynae cancers are always much more likely to be something less serious than a gynae cancer. But for 58 people with gynae anatomy, every day, 58 people a day are diagnosed with a gynae cancer in the UK. So most of the time, the thing that people are worrying about is nothing, but for those people it is something. And yeah, we just wanted to create this sort of space, even though I hate that sort of jargon, you know, create the safe space where, you know, I can ask an expert on the subject that we're talking about each week about that subject. We can take your questions, we can ask the expert your questions, and then also sometimes when I'm not interviewing a healthcare professional, we interview people about their lived experience about said subject. So this series 6 of Probably Nothing, which will run for every Tuesday throughout April, it's going to be all about the inherited risks associated with gynae cancers. So there are 5 gynae cancers in order of prevalence: womb, ovarian, cervical, vulval and vaginal. And I think a lot of people understandably think, oh, my mum had cervical cancer, so I'm going to get cervical cancer, or oh, my auntie had vulval cancer, so I'm at a higher risk. So the only 2 cancers out of the 5 that have sort of familial links and hereditary risks are ovarian and womb. So we're going to speak about the ovarian cancer side of things with regards to inherited risks today, and then talk about womb cancer and the associated risks and conditions later on in the series. So today and next week are ovarian cancer hereditary risks, and if people don't know already, that's the BRCA gene alteration. So I've done a really long intro again, as usual. I'm going to bring in my wonderful guest for the BRCA chat. And right, so now look, people will know her as my Ask Eve counterpart. So she does do Ask Eve. We've got lovely Hilary and lovely Tracie. This is Tracie. So people will know her as the Ask Eve, like slightly older version of me. Look at us with our little curls together. But she also has a really, really, really swanky NHS job title. And I've got nothing else written down. Everything else is off the cuff. But I had to write down her title. So Tracie Miles, Dr. Tracie Miles, Associate Director of Nursing and Midwifery for the NHS Southwest Genomic Medicine Service Alliance.
Spot on.
Yeah, well, obviously it's spot on because I copied it down from your email signature. Right, we've got now 25 minutes until you need to go, and Disruptive, who I always need to say thank you because they do all of this for free for us, I need to shut shop, and these are supposed to be only half-an-hour chats. So, Tracie, who are you with regards to the genomics side of things, please? And then I'm going to ask you about BRCA.
Thanks, Karen. So my new role is having, because when we first met, I was a gynae cancer nurse specialist. And the reason I got into learning about genetics was because women with ovarian cancer were coming in and saying, have I got the Angelina Jolie gene? So I learned a lot about that. We're going to be talking a lot about that in a minute. But my role actually spreads across all cancers now, all rare diseases, and into maternity. So I'm helping nurses and midwives embed and learn about genomics, genetics to help their patients, as we do, for example, at Ask Eve.
What do you mean if people don't know what genomics and genetics mean? Like why, like what does that mean?
Yeah, and it might sound like a crazy question for you, Karen, because you get it, because you and I have been chatting about genomics, genetics with BRCA, and as you say, you're going to do Lynch later on in the series. But actually, a lot of people think about our genes as, well, it's all about our curly hair color. She's natural. Okay, I'm not. I'm grey.
Well, that's generous of you, Tracie.
There you go. You see, we retain friendship, whatever. But it's not just about our hair color and our eye color and whether or not we can eat 100 donuts and stay slim or not and get tubby. It's not about those kind of things. It's more than that. When it comes to our health, we actually know that by looking at some genes, we can actually see whether or not we're at a higher risk of getting a cancer, for example, or at a higher risk of getting a rare disease. And for the work and the research that's being done now, we can also then think about how we can manage our health in the future. Are there any medicines we can take? Are there any operations we can have? Is there any screening we should have? Like cervical screening, that's not down to genes, but sometimes knowing what your genetic predisposition is can actually help with a kind of screening.
And at the beginning, well, during the very long intro, I said we're going to be talking about like inherited risks and the BRCA gene. So can someone inherit? So say my mum has ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
Can I inherit ovarian cancer from her, or is it the risk that I inherit? Can you just explain a little bit about what an inherited risk means?
That's a really good question, actually, Karen, because having the gene, an altered gene, we all have BRCA genes. They're called BRCA1 and 2. It's very easy to remember. There's only 2 of them. We all have them. You and I have them. The guy's back doing the recording now. It's not just a girl thing, okay? And if we have an altered BRCA gene, because our BRCA1 and 2 protect you and I against getting a breast or an ovarian type of cancer. It protects the boys in the back room there doing the filming from getting a prostate cancer. If we have faulty genes, then that increases our risk of getting the cancer. It doesn't mean we're going to get it. It just increases our risk.
So the BRCA gene alteration affects the risk, increases the risk of getting breast, ovarian, and prostate, depending on what combination of body parts you've got.
Exactly. And a smaller amount, a very tiny amount, but it's very important to people who've suffered from it, of pancreas cancer as well. So we shouldn't forget that.
Okay. And how much does it increase someone's risk? So you're saying that, so we're all, because it's interesting, isn't it, the language we use around this sort of thing. So I've definitely, and I'm sure you've heard it a million times, heard people, we all sort of informalize language sometimes, and I've definitely heard people say, oh, I'm BRCA, but they mean I've got a BRCA gene alteration, or I've tested positive for a gene alteration, or sometimes it's spoken about as a mutation. So you and I are sat here, everyone in the world has BRCA genes, but it's when there's a problem, an alteration, something's gone wrong within the genes, that's what people mean when they refer to as, oh, I'm BRCA positive, or I'm BRCA. That's that sort of language.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when we're talking about language as well, you and I are using the word alteration. In days gone by, we would use the word mutation, and that's still sometimes used. Other people will call it variant of pathogenic significance. So there's all sorts of different language. I know.
That's not happening on here.
No. We'll call it alteration. But you were asking about numbers, and I think that's really important. So assuming that you and I don't have an altered BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene, our likelihood, our risk of getting an ovarian cancer is about 2%. Pretty low.
So in our lifetime, having ovaries.
Exactly. So if we had an alteration in our BRCA1 gene, our risk would go up to about between 30 and 50%. And you're also right to think about age. The older you get, the more likely the risk. So I'm slightly older than you, just a bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a tiny bit. You've got more polyfiller on than me. No, seriously
though. Don't get bitchy, Tracie.
It's
this
not
is a
changed,
helpful
darling.
section.
So yeah, BRCA1, the 2%, which is the sort of the average, the normal risk, would increase to about 30 to 50%. BRCA2 with ovarian cancer, the risk would go up less, but still significantly to 10 to 20%.
And so BRCA1 has the greater increase in risk for ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
Does BRCA1 also have a greater increased risk for the breast, prostate, and pancreatic cancer, or is it just in ovarian that there's quite a big difference?
It's actually with breast, it's similar as in BRCA1, it's about 65 to 85%.
Oh wow, so it's more significant with breast cancer.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And in BRCA2, it's about 40 to 85%.
Okay.
With prostate, I keep calling the guys in the back room. It's a bit rude, isn't it?
We don't know what that means, Tracie.
No, yeah. The director, the film producers, in the studio. It would be BRCA2 that they would worry about more if they had an alteration in BRCA2 when we're talking about prostate cancer. And that tends to be, we would see that in the younger male.
And I will try and stick to ovarian questions, but yes, if I ask the odd prostate or breast cancer question, excuse me. So you've talked about kind of the average person's lifetime risk of one of these diseases, so ovarian cancer. Then the increased risk with BRCA1 and BRCA2 with regards to ovarian cancer. Is it kind of like everybody in the world with ovaries is at the same risk of having a BRCA alteration, or are there certain groups or communities that are at a greater risk, or is it just you might have BRCA, everyone in the world is on the same level when we're born?
No, you're absolutely right. There are different groups in, and actually there is the Ashkenazi Jew population, who we know have a much higher risk. And in fact, there have been some studies done that have actually proven that. It's not just anecdotal. My auntie and my uncle and sister and this, that, and the other. And these, so we do know that they have a much higher risk. 40% higher oftentimes. And then there are other pockets of in different areas of the world. But in our country, or the country where we're filming, and especially in London, the Ashkenazi Jew population is quite high, and we do see quite an increase.
And so we spoke about the sort of increased risk depending on if, for example, you're Ashkenazi Jewish, and the sort of general lifetime risk anyway, and what it means if you have a BRCA positive result or BRCA alteration. So we've mentioned obviously the relevant cancers like breast, ovarian. Let's stick with ovarian because of Eve. So does that mean that everyone that's now diagnosed with an ovarian cancer is tested for BRCA? Is it part of the process, or is it that I will find out if my mum has ovarian cancer, I'll get tested? Like, how do you go from not knowing you have an alteration to knowing? Do you have to wait until you get one of the cancers?
No, actually, but that's a really good question. So I'll try and divide it into discrete groups. So your question around if a woman comes and she goes through an oncology, a cancer pathway, because her doctors think she's got ovary cancer, and then they indeed find that she does have an ovary cancer. Nowadays, pretty much every woman will be offered to have a BRCA test. At least 80% of the cancers, there's all sorts of different types of ovary cancers, but the majority of them are called something called high-grade serous. Not serious, it is serious, but high-grade serous.
Serous, yeah.
And all of those women should be offered a BRCA test.
And is that because you know through all the BRCA research that disease is linked with the BRCA alteration? So because there are so many different subtypes of ovarian cancer, aren't there?
Absolutely. And it's important that our patient that is going through the diagnostic tests for ovarian cancer is offered that test. So if you think 80% of the ovarian cancer ladies should be offered that test, probably about 90% when you look at the other different variants or different types of cancers. So she should feel comfortable, and her family should feel comfortable asking the doctors and nurses who are looking after her, if she isn't being offered a test, why not? Because the reason for doing that is it can predict how the cancer is likely to grow. We want to stop that happening with the treatment she's going to have. And it can also help decide on what medicines will be useful and not useful. And that's not just chemotherapy medicine. So it's important to know that.
So whether or not you have the BRCA alteration, or you're positive or negative for BRCA, however you want to kind of phrase it, that so say we both have ovarian cancer, you're BRCA positive, I'm BRCA negative. Even though we've got the same disease. So same, say high-grade serous, you're negative, I'm positive, or vice versa. Would we then maybe have different treatment based on whether we're BRCA or not?
Possibly, yes.
Really?
Our oncologists are, so that's the doctors that prescribe our chemotherapy, because pretty much every ovarian cancer lady will be offered chemotherapy. Our oncologists will actually, they'll give us very similar drugs, but they may flex them slightly according to what our status is, what our BRCA status is.
And a quick, maybe a slight tangent, but often when we talk about, for example, womb cancer, and obviously everybody that's diagnosed with every disease, every problem in the world has got an individual case and an individual sort of journey and story. But we generally say, don't we, that womb cancer, when applicable, when it's caught early enough, is treated with surgery. And you've said something very different for ovarian cancer. You've said it's almost always chemo. Why is it that, for example, womb cancer is like pretty much going to be an operation, and ovarian cancer, which is only up the road on the gynae anatomy, why is that like totally different?
Because they're totally different spread of disease and a completely different change in the cancer cell. But you're right. I did say chemotherapy with ovarian cancer, and it is pretty much always chemotherapy plus surgery.
Okay.
So our ovarian cancer lady, it's a tough journey for her and her family and people caring about her watching. So she's likely to have chemotherapy and surgery. So she'll have a combination of the two.
And is that because sadly ovarian cancer is often diagnosed later rather than when, for example, often womb cancer is early and a hysterectomy can sort it out? Is that kind of why? Because ovarian cancer tends to be diagnosed later, so they've got more work to do in terms of treatment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And womb cancer, as women, our wombs are designed to keep things in, babies, for example. That's what the womb's all about. So what tends to happen with a womb cancer diagnosis is, unless she's diagnosed at a very late stage, the cancer is held within the womb lining, the endometrial lining, and that's why surgery does the trick. If we need to add in other treatments, we might look at chemotherapy, depending on the cell change, or we might look at radiotherapy. But you're absolutely spot on. With ovary cancer, it's occult, it's hidden, it's inside the ovaries. Usually by the time she is experiencing the symptoms that we talk about at Ask Eve, the cancer has come out of the ovaries and is within her peritoneal cavity. So the bit between our rib cage and right down to where our hair is on our pubes, if we have hair there. But yeah, that's that area. So that's why she needs surgery to remove the lumps of cancer, but chemotherapy to kill it off.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry about the tangent, but I think it's nice to kind of understand the different. Okay, so back to BRCA. So somebody has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and is probably going to get offered a BRCA test, most likely, again, depending on the various subtypes. So say that this, I've never really totally understood this, and I don't know if this is a silly question, but I'm going to ask you a bit about kind of the sort of likelihood of inheriting it from a parent in a second. But okay, I don't know how to phrase this, but I'm just going to ask. And I realise I keep forgetting we're being recorded. I'm just having a chat with my friend. But what I'm trying to get my head around is, so say I've just been diagnosed with an ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to, because of the type, most of the types are linked to BRCA, and mine is, so I'm going to get a BRCA test.
Yeah.
And my BRCA test is positive. So I know I've got high-grade serous and I'm BRCA positive. That'll inform the plan of treatment, whatever, right? What if, because it's an inherited alteration, that alteration in a family has to start somewhere, right? Like, what if I say, I know my mum and dad's medical history, their parents, their parents, their parents, inside out. Not many people do, but say I do. And there's no history of these relevant BRCA cancers whatsoever. Can it suddenly be that I, at 21, bit older, but with one of the relevant diseases and have a BRCA positive status, can it just start at some point in a family line?
Yeah, it's called, do you want the posh name for that? De
Yeah,
novo.
I do, because I never asked. That's one of the things I've never asked, even though I've been talking about this for years. And people and I often it's reassuring to people that, if you don't, and we'll talk about the history and getting tested if you don't have a cancer but have a history of the diseases in a second. But I have always sort of thought, yes, but what if it's good that you've got no history? You're less likely to have a BRCA alteration than if you do have family history, but it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, and that's called de novo. So in your example, the first one, it would be you. And so when we do the BRCA test, you actually make a really good point, Karen, as usual. When we do the test, we test the somatic, which is our posh medical word for the tissue, to see if the change is just in the tissue in the cancer, the ovary cancer. And then we also do a second test, which is called a germline, to see if it's in the blood. Because sometimes it's only, I'm not negating how crap this is for the patient, but it is only in the tissue and not in the blood, which means that in that example, it's not going to get passed on through families. So it's really important. So when women are looking to be tested, or we offer both the tissue and the blood.
Tissue and blood testing. Okay. Yeah. Because if it's blood, it can be passed. If it's tissue,
exactly.
It can't. Okay. Yeah. So say I found out I'm BRCA positive because I've been tested after receiving an ovarian cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
What does that then mean? Say I've got a mum, a brother, and a daughter. Does that mean that because I've got a positive status, that my nearest and dearest can just turn up at my cancer ward and have a test as well? Like, what happens then?
So what happens then is they're going to be really worried about you first off, and then they're going to start worrying about themselves. Could they have the same change? So if they know, so what would happen then is you can't get tested on the cancer ward, not the family. But what you can do, but it's a good question, because often they think they can. I tested Karen, why not test the rest of the family? So what they would then do is be referred to clinical genetics. So that's away from the cancer team, who would then see them and take a very detailed family history, also called a pedigree, also called a family tree. It means all means the same thing. Because actually what we often find is, although the family think there wasn't any cancer in the family, they then find out that Uncle Joe died of men's problems. That could be prostate cancer. Auntie Joan died of women's problems. That could be a womb cancer or an ovary cancer. So that is what will happen. It won't happen as fast as the patient being. So the other thing is expectations. The patient is tested straight away, or should be, because we need to manage treatment. Her family, it can take months, and it may be that once the family have spoken to clinical genetics, that the clinical genetics team work out and go, do you know, it's not relevant to test you. So it doesn't buy you a test immediately. Does that make sense?
It doesn't buy you a test, but it prompts investigating if the family want to investigate.
Yeah. Exactly.
And how likely, so we've spoken lots kind of on Eva Peel stuff and other chats that but if people don't know, it's not just your mum and a girl's thing. It can be passed from either parent, can't it? The alteration.
Absolutely.
And what is the likelihood if my dad is BRCA positive? How likely is it that I'm BRCA positive? Is it kind of like, oh well, it definitely is?
It's a 50-50.
Oh, really? So flip of a coin.
It is a flip of a coin. So basically, you can have any person, Adam or Eve, if you like, who is BRCA positive, has a 50% chance of passing it on to their children. So you can have that family situation where you can have your patient, we'll call her Tracie, I don't like calling her Karen, who's got an ovarian cancer. whose family history doesn't show any cancers at all, but in fact has a germline, has it in her blood, and it's just the 50-50 situation. It's just never been passed down to her. Although there's a catch in that one, because if it was in my blood, I would have had it from either passed from my mum or my dad. It can't skip generations.
It can't. So a parent who is BRCA positive could have 7 kids.
Yeah.
It's 50-50 whether they've got it or not.
Yeah.
Say 3 have it and 4 don't.
Yeah.
The 4 that don't, their children don't need to be tested, even though their granddad has it.
Yes, exactly.
Fine. And the 3 that do have it, are then the 50-50 goes down, and it's 50-50 whether their children have it. But if the granddaughter on the positive side doesn't, then that great grandchild doesn't need to be tested.
Exactly. And who said we weren't good at maths?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm kind of just doing like a little visual pyramid. So, okay, so I'm aware we're running out of time. So that's how people can find out when it's from a diagnosis of cancer.
Yeah.
And that ball rolls that way for the patient and the family. It takes longer for the family to be tested. Nobody's forced to be tested, but they're offered it's investigated when relevant.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if there's no actual diagnosis, which is a good thing, but I've got, Tracie, I've got an awful lot of BRCA relevant cancers in my family. My auntie and my nan had breast cancer, and my dad had prostate cancer. So if I think I might be at risk, because we get loads of people at Ask Eve, don't we, saying XYZ in my family had XYZ, I'm worried. What happens?
So that's when our worried person, we'll call her Eve, goes to the GP and says, I'm worried. This is my family tree. I've got cancer in my family.
Why is it why do I have to go to the GP?
Because your GP will then listen to you and go, okay, yeah, see what you mean. And your GP is like the gatekeeper, if you like, is the person that needs to refer you to clinical genetics.
And then they'll write and say, hello, I've got Eve who's got X history.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the GP will take, I was going to say back of a fag packet. I've done it now, but of course GPs don't smoke because they're so health conscious.
And they don't write their notes on the back of the Benson Hedges, Tracie.
No, they don't. It wouldn't fit.
No.
And if we're talking about that family history, so the GP will take, if I say rough and ready, but the GP will take a family history and will likely ask Eve, either side of generations, aunts, uncles, and a couple of generations up. You see, you've got me doing it now. What the cancers are in her family. And then the GP can actually do a kind of like a risk score. So the GPs aren't daft; they know what they're doing, and that will then give them a setting to write to clinical genetics and say, "I've got Eve here. I've done a family history. She's concerned, and I think it would be worth you seeing her." And that's the way it works.
And what are the sort of, with regards to, we're talking about NHS free testing here, what are the guidelines? Like, how many people in my family do I need without having a cancer myself to get this test? Like, what are the qualifications, if you will? So
with ovarian cancer, there's a kind of rule of thumb. And when I say kind of rule of thumb, because I don't want our viewers to go, right, that's me. But generally, our Eve, who's going to the GP, who's worried, needs to have 2 first-degree relatives.
What's a first-degree relative?
So that would be a sister, a mum, an auntie. So when you're thinking of the family next to you, so it would be your mum, your auntie, going upwards. Going downwards, it would be, or across, it would be your sister. Going downwards, God forbid, it would be your kids. And then if you go up another one, your granny.
Okay.
And look, I'm making it all a girl thing, but it is boys as well.
Yeah.
So bad me.
Yeah.
So basically, relatives.
And it's that on the same side of the family. So it's kind of like not who cares, but if someone has their dad's sister had breast cancer and their nan on the other side had ovarian cancer, compared to a mum and an auntie with an ovarian cancer, it's that's more likely to be BRCA than
Yeah.
the previous scenario.
It's got to be on one side. You can't take one from one side and one from the
Yes.
other. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so generally it needs to be, general rule of thumb, 2 first-degree relatives with an ovarian or a breast cancer, and especially at a younger age.
I was just about to say, does the age of diagnosis make a difference?
It does. So cancer generally, apart from obviously the pediatric, the children's cancers, is a cancer, especially within Gynae, of the older person. Cervix is one that isn't, but the other ones tend to be of an older person. That doesn't mean younger women don't get ovary cancer. Doesn't mean that they don't get womb cancer. We know, but generally, so age. So the younger she is, and breast and ovarian cancer, 2 close degree relatives, and that generally is enough to spark off a clinical genetics review. Generally.
What if I had, because I'm just thinking, I know people will be watching kind of the different types of scenarios. So what if my mum died of ovarian cancer at 40?
Yeah.
And her mum, my nan, died of breast cancer at a ripe old age of 95. Because we also need to remember that breast cancer is one of the 4 most common cancers all over. So that is kind of like an old lady that dies of a breast cancer in her 90s. That's not crazy uncommon, is it? But it's the 40-year-old mum ovarian that's the more of a red siren.
Exactly.
But but my nan isn't a first degree relative, so my nan is far up. But would my mum at a younger age, even though that's 1 first degree relative, kind of be enough to spark a little?
Probably not in this situation, which is why, and that you make a really good illustration, which is why going to the GP is the right thing to do, to explore your family history in more detail rather than in the short period of time that we've got. But that's a really, really good example. So that's why it's probably in that situation, they'd say, do you know, we just need to, you need to know your signs and symptoms of ovarian cancer. They wouldn't shuffle off this woman, Eve, or call her worried. But it's not sending up red flag signals. But then the rest of the family would need to be explored, because let's find out if there are young prostate cancers, if there are any other cancers. So that's the key thing.
And one last question, because I know you need to go, and thank you so much for your time. But so say, let's talk about the finding out your BRCA positive through family history rather than because you've got the cancer yourself. So I've found out, I've got the family history, I've got the BRCA gene alteration, I've just found that out. What do I do? Because there's not, and we talk about this a lot, so we don't need to go into that in too much detail, but cervical cancer has a screening program. There's not the equivalent for any of the other gynae cancers, including womb and ovarian, which are the ones with familial links. So kind of, well, what do I do if I've got BRCA positive status, but there's no screening? So what happens?
So what we don't want you to do is panic, which of course you might do.
I think people will, won't they? Of course they will, because they know that they're at a massively increased risk.
Which is why when we do predictive testing, so somebody who hasn't got a cancer, thankfully, so this is family testing, we make sure that they go through clinical genetics, because part of the counselling and consenting before having a test is to talk Eve through what happens if the test comes back as, you are BRCA positive. Now, so what do I do?
It's not just, I've given my family history. Oh, you do qualify for testing, Eve, Karen, whatever we want to call her. Little quick prick of the finger. Oh, you're positive. Goodbye. It's not like that.
No, not at all. Because before she is tested, the genetic counsellor wants to make sure that she will know what to do with the information, because that information can then look at heightening her awareness of looking for signs and symptoms of ovarian cancer. So she'll tune into the Eve appeal, for example. It will also mean that she can then consider what's called risk-reducing surgery. So Angelina Jolie, who I spoke about right at the beginning, who got a lot of our ovarian cancer patients interested because her mum had ovarian cancer, chose to have risk reducing surgery. And in fact, she appeared on Time magazine. She was quite an ambassador, really, because she had her breasts and her ovaries and fallopian tubes removed, risk reducing, i.e., removing the organs at risk of getting cancer. Now, I've said that in about 20 seconds. That's an enormous thing for a woman to go through.
Of course, yeah. I appreciate, because obviously we're we haven't got forever to talk about it, but it's a massive subject. But the crux of it, because we're having a direct, open, honest chat, the crux of it is, if you are given a BRCA positive status through family history testing rather than, oh, you've got cancer, testing that route, there are the options to have the relevant organ. So, i.e., for me, it would be breast and ovaries removed, because obviously your risk of that cancer reduces if you don't have that part of the body.
Exactly.
But obviously it's a massive subject, isn't it? And we we don't have time to go on about it forever, but it's a huge topic, and it's not to be taken lightly at all.
You got it.
Go into it. Tracie, I will let you go, because you've got to go and get a colleague from the station, because you're doing a talk, something genetic-y.
Lynch next.
Fine. Well, I've got a different guest for the Lynch section of Probably Nothing. But thank you so much. And I'll say goodbye to everybody in a sec, but I'll say goodbye to you first.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, boys in the studio. Cheers.
Bye. I can't stop her flirting with people. Yes, sorry. So yes, we try and always do these episodes half an hour, but as you can see, with every subject related to anything to do with any of the gynae cancers, there's always so much more to unpack. But yeah, hopefully we've kind of given enough, at least top line, and going into some detail information in the sort of half an hour or so we've had together. And yeah, just to reiterate that we had to sort of wrap up when talking about preventative surgery, but are very aware that that is not a decision to be taken lightly, and hence why part of genetic testing, there's the counselling element to it, because obviously deciding what to do, reducing your risk is a big decision. So, what a whirlwind. I'm going to go and go to Sainsbury's and buy some leeks and have creamed leeks for dinner. That's what I'm fancying. That's the vibe, because even though it's April, it is not as warm as I want it to be. So I need hearty winter food. Anyway, I'll stop telling people about what I'm having for dinner. Thank you so much for watching. Ben from Disruptive, who's in the little chat we've got down the screen, is like, creamed leeks. Yeah, I'll tell you about them in a second, Ben. Let me say goodbye to our lovely audience. Thank you so much to everybody that's either watched live or is watching this on catch up. I really hope you found that episode about the BRCA gene alteration with the lovely Tracie interesting, helpful, informative. There's lots of information about BRCA on our eveappeal.org.uk website. And if you've got any questions about your own situation, you want to find out more information and talk to someone directly, then our Ask Eve nurse service is, of course, always available on nurse@eveappeal.org.uk, and you can ask us anything and we will always help as best we can. So next week on the 12th of April, we're going to be talking to someone directly affected by the BRCA gene alteration, so the kind of patient side of things rather than the professional or semi-professional, because Tracie was silly sometimes, wasn't she? Rather than the sort of professional side of things. Yeah, we're going to talk to someone who's got a lived experience of the BRCA gene alteration. So if you've got any questions you'd like to put to them, you can send them to us in the next week. Send it to probablynothing@eveappeal.org.uk. So that is next week. And then the last two sessions for this series of Probably Nothing, we'll be talking about Lynch syndrome, which is the genetic condition associated with womb cancer, an increased risk of womb cancer. So thank you so much for watching. Yes, please do contact Ask Eve if you ever need to ask any type of gynae query. Stay safe and see you next week. Thank you so much.